All right, so as that last video ended, we was talking about the movement of the material through the esophagus to go down to the stomach, and the fact that if it does come back up the esophagus, it can lead to ulcers. We refer to that as acid reflux, or sometimes known as heartburn, because that acid really gives a sensation where the esophagus runs behind the heart, that the heart almost feels like it's on fire. Now, once the esophagus passes through the diaphragm muscle here, into the stomach, into what we call the cardia region of the stomach. The cardia is this region here where the end of the esophagus dumps in. Then we have the fundus, this dome-shaped top. We have the greater curvature and the lesser curvature of the stomach. That makes up mainly the body of the stomach. And then we have this narrowing and curved end here we call the pyloric region, or the pylorus. And of course, the other end of the stomach, the upper end with the lower esophageal sphincter, keeps the food materials in the stomach. But we also have another sphincter muscle right here in the pyloric region, right before it dumps into the first region of the small intestine. So following the esophagus, we have the stomach. Now, I said before, the stomach has 3 layers of muscles. So it can literally contract in the 3 dimensions of space. And this allows a lot of churning and sloshing, really a lot of mechanical mixing of the food materials that are in the stomach. And it may remain in the stomach for hours, depending on the food material. Some materials are going to pass through very quickly, some can take several minutes, and some can literally take hours. So depending on how quickly the physical and chemical digestion of the food materials can occur, depends on how long it's going to stay in the stomach. Now, in the stomach, if I had prepared and got a good model of the stomach real quick, I could have showed you the wrinkles in the stomach. The wrinkles are known as the gastric rugae. Is this in shot? Yeah. Here's a stomach from a different model. This one here, a little larger than this model. But you can see here the esophagus coming in, the fundus, cardia, the pylorus. But when we open this thing up, you can see this wrinkly pattern or appearance inside the stomach. And this wrinkly appearance, or these wrinkles, are called rugae. Now, to distinguish them that they're in the stomach, we call them gastric rugae. It's pronounced rugae, but it looks like rugae. But these things help the distension of the stomach. So as we overeat, we need to really stretch our stomach. This allows it to stretch more. But it also helps create an inner surface area there to help slosh the materials around and more thoroughly and more efficiently mix those material. We have lots of specialized cells inside the stomach. We have what used to be known as goblet cells. We call them mucus cells, obviously producing the mucus layer. Now the mucus layer is really nice and thick inside the stomach compared to the rest of the GI tract. And this is because parietal cells in the stomach secrete hydrochloric acid. And hydrochloric acid, as you may well know from chemistry, is a very strong acid. Now this is very beneficial for denaturing our proteins, for our protein digestion. But one of the issues with this is it makes a very toxic environment, and all the other structures prior and following the stomach are really not equipped to handle that much of an acidic nature. Now, when we look, there are some other important things the stomach secretes. The stomach also secretes hormone, and you should remember that when we covered endocrine system. Gastrin, which both the stomach and the small intestine can secrete this. But this is really what kicks in intestinal motility. So as the material gets ready to leave the stomach, and we call that material chyme. Chyme is what is going to leave the stomach and start into the small intestine. chyme is basically like a milkshake-like consistency. It has been thoroughly mixed, both mechanically and chemically, and will enter the small intestine for the last of the chemical aspect of digestion. Now, once the chyme is prepared to go, the gastrin has already been released so that the intestines are prepared for the material that it's about to receive. Some of the other things that the stomach secretes besides gastrin, I already mentioned hydrochloric, I forgot to write it down, so make sure you know that's a secretion from the stomach. Another one, very important material, known as intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor is the only life essential function of the stomach. In other words, we could cut the end of the esophagus and splice it together with the beginning of the small intestine, completely bypassing the stomach. And the only thing that you would suffer is you'd have to take intrinsic factor the rest of your life. We have to have intrinsic factor for basically the absorption of our B vitamins. So without intrinsic factor, we have a B vitamin issue, and so we have to artificially supplement intrinsic factor. But as long as we have intact our stomach, we make plenty of intrinsic factor naturally. Some of the major other materials we make also have a digestive process, just like the hydrochloric I said helped create an acid environment for denaturing proteins. We also have a specific enzyme known as pepsin. Now, pepsin is an enzyme that digests proteins, but because there's a lot of protein in cells, in the cell membranes, in the organelles, well, a cell that produces a enzyme that denatures proteins would destroy itself. So the way the body does this is the actual hormone or the enzyme is released as a precursor molecule. So the precursor molecule known as pepsinogen is secreted by the cells in the stomach in an inactive form, so it doesn't digest the proteins. But once that pepsinogen hits that stomach acid and that acidic nature, it modifies or alters that pepsinogen to the final form we call pepsin. Now it becomes active and can break the proteins down into its smaller subunits that we call amino acids. And amino acids are small enough molecules, they're much more easily absorbed once we get to the intestinal tract. Now, once we have passed through the stomach, the chyme is released from the caloric valve. It then enters this first region here of the small intestine. If I pull the stomach out of the way, it reveals that, hey, here's the location of your pancreas right behind it. You can see the white duct running through it, right above our transverse colon here. But if I pull the colon out of the way and all the other small intestines, so you can see the duodenum a little better, you can see it kind of wraps around the pancreas, forming kind of a C-shaped structure that's kind of reclining on its back a little bit. But it's here we're going to have the pancreatic duct is going to drain, and also the duct here from the gallbladder, this green structure I'm tapping with my thumb. Because when that's in place, you can see that gallbladder sits right there also. And so they run through a common duct that runs through both of, or connects both of them, and then drains that into the first region of the small intestine that we call the duodenum. Duodenum is fairly short structure. It's not very long compared to at least the jejunum and the ileum. Let me erase up to the stomach, but following the stomach, we're now going to dump this in to the small intestine. Now, in the small intestine, there's three regions I'd like you to know, and that is the duodenum. I've also heard other professionals pronounce it duodenum, but I think both pronunciations are acceptable. It's just my major professor called it duodenum, and so I've called it duodenum ever since. The next region is the jejunum, and then the last one is the ileum. Now remember, the ileum was the hip bone over here. Remember the large flat bone on a skeleton of the two os coxa that make up the pelvic girdle? We had the ilium, the ischium, and the pubic bone. Now the ilium here was I-L-L-I-U-M. This one is a single L and an E. So this is the third region of our small intestine. So the duodenum here is just 8-10 inches maybe, not very long structure. But this is where we're going to complete the chemical digestion of the food. So the thing that the duodenum is going to receive is our pancreatic juice and our bile. Now, here's where we have some accessory structures come in again. So what is dumping into the duodenum to deliver these two essential materials is obviously our pancreas, which I just showed you is right behind the stomach. This is the pancreas, very glandular, globular looking structure when you look at the tissue. But the gallbladder, now the liver actually makes the bile. So the liver is constantly producing bile and dripping it down into our gallbladder. But one of the things that the gallbladder does besides store that bile is it's going to concentrate it. So we have also the liver and also the gallbladder. All three playing a role here with the duodenum. Now, pancreatic juice, it has a couple major functions. One of the major functions of pancreatic juice is the fact that it is going to have to neutralize that pH. Remember, coming out of the stomach, that chyme has a high acidity. So we have in the pancreatic juice bicarbonate. Bicarbonate pulls those hydrogen ions out of the solution and helps neutralize the pH so it doesn't burn our small intestine. Remember, the small intestine doesn't have a real thick mucus layer like the stomach. It's real thin like the esophagus. So one of the first major functions of that pancreatic juice is to neutralize the pH. One of the second major functions here is it produces a whole shitload of enzymes. And these enzymes range from amylase. Remember we had amylase up in the salivary glands in the saliva, which digests our carbs. So it breaks our complex sugar molecules into smaller and smaller sugars so that we can absorb those. So we call this, and to distinguish it, we call it pancreatic amylase instead of salivary amylase. But we have everything from DNase, which breaks down the genetic materials. We have lipase, and some of these, I mean, I already wrote some of them down, but amylase, lipase. Now lipase, obviously, with lipids being the root word, these are enzymes, an enzyme that breaks down our lipid molecules. So we're going to have these large molecules of fat, or lipids, but we're going to have to break them down into smaller and smaller molecules to be able to absorb those. So lipase plays a very important functional role there. Now, another couple of enzymes. We have, again, some more that do proteins. So we have some known as, one kind is known as trypsin. We have another one, chymotrypsin. I'm running out of space here, but you can look up how to spell those in the book. But these are some of your enzymes here that are produced in the pancreatic juice. And we will stop right there and start with the liver next.